Well, again, I'm Bill Russell, President of Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce, and we have another Focus Friday, an outstanding Focus Friday, talking about the political climate in North Carolina, probably across the country. But first, we want to recognize our presenting sponsor, Mike Riley with Novant Health. He is the president of Huntersville Medical Center. Mike, what's going on at Huntersville's Medical Center and with Novant?
Thanks, Bill. Novant is always excited to sponsor this event. This is a great informational session every month for the community. Novant's all about the community. We want to make sure that we're involved, that you look to us for your healthcare. As far as the hospital, things are going relatively well. I think we're a good bit past post-COVID. We're almost, I hate to say normalizing, but we're almost normalizing again, and it's becoming sort of a regular hospital year again. So I knock on a whole lot of wood when I say that, just to say it's getting back to, I don't even want to say normal, but we're doing fine at the hospital. And again, happy to sponsor this event and looking forward to the discussion.
Mike, I want to thank you again for your participation last week in the Healthcare Summit, and particularly your responses and the closing comment you made in regards to if you had a magic wand, what you could do, and it was access to healthcare for everybody, which drew a lot of applause. And I'm sure Senator Thom thought that applause was for Jeff for asking such a great question. But thank you again for your participation in that program. That was a very insightful panel discussion.
My pleasure.
Jeff, I am going to kick it over to you to introduce our speaker, and I'm excited to hear about this because I've known Paul for quite a few years, and with him being involved not only with elected officials but with issues that are impacting our business community. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion, and I'm going to kick it over to you.
All right, thank you, Bill. Thank you, Mike. This morning for our Focus Friday, we have the distinct honor and pleasure of having Paul Shumaker join us. Paul's going to do a presentation here in a second, give us a little background on what's going on in politics and parties here around the state. And then Paul and I are going to jump into a conversation on a whole host of issues. A lot of people around the Lake Norman area know Paul had been involved in many issues, but I think what's important to recognize is Paul really is a nationally recognized expert on the political climate and the political environment. He's an advisor to U.S. senators, to governors. He's a data analytics guru and expert par excellent, no comparison. People lean on him to understand the electorate, to understand what are important issues to folks, and how to help direct being elected. In full disclosure, Paul helped me on my campaigns when I was running. And Paul, it is a distinct pleasure to welcome you this morning, and I'm going to give you the floor.
Appreciate it, Jeff. Thank you very much. I'm going to go look to do my screen share here, and then we will, hopefully it will flip over and we'll be good to go.
And when, if we run out of things to talk about politics, you can give us all tips on fishing.
Do y'all have the full screen or just partial screen on this?
I do not see anything on mine.
All right, then let me go back and do this again. I'm only showing. This is, I did not know I was going to do the share. I'm not getting a, here we go. All right. We should, give me 1 second. Now, do you have full screen?
We do. I do. Is everybody else good?
Everybody's good. I got it from Bill. All right. I'm going to run through this relatively quickly because Jeff told me earlier that he wants to go through all 35 to 60 questions that he sent me. But I want to talk about trend lines that are taking place in North Carolina, not just from a voter registration and shift in population, which I mean, the voter registration follows population shift, but also what's taking place from the electorate standpoint at the same time, because I think that's very important. And one of the things I like to say is sort of an introduction to this, is that you have the privilege of living in a state that is probably going to determine which party controls the White House and which party controls the U.S. Senate. I've worked for Senator Thom Tillis going back all the way to 2006 when he first ran for state house. You cannot keep a Republican majority in the United States Senate without having 2 Republican senators from North Carolina. Are you going to get a little bit of partisan flair from me because I work on the side for the Republican side. Secondly is a Democrat candidate can win the White House without carrying North Carolina, but a Republican candidate, because the Electoral College, cannot win the White House without carrying North Carolina. So it's a must-win state for the Republicans, which will impact what takes place, not just in 2024, but in 2026. We're going to be the epicenter of national politics, literally for the next 3.5 years. So on my side for my side of the business, it's an exciting time to be in North Carolina. Here is registration trends, 10 years. I went back the last 10 years. And one of the things, I'll wait to get to the ballot stuff. If you look at the trends here, we had a net gain, 760,000 new voters. Democratic Party during that time had a net loss of 370,000. This is done from the November election day 2012 to November election day 2022 in that 10-year trend. If you always put in this line, despite spending 147 million by both the state Republican and Democratic Party during that 10-year period of time, not counting candidate spending, which eclipsed billions of dollars, both parties had a net market share loss of the overall voter registration. Unaffiliated added during that time 929,000. One of the things I always say when I'm doing a presentation similar to this, if we have any unaffiliated women with 4-year college degrees, you need to understand you hold the keys to success for North Carolina candidates on both sides of the aisle. That's how it breaks down with the impact of what unaffiliateds have done in this state. I broke this data and looking at it, I said, okay, it's a very simple sort on an Excel spreadsheet from low to high. We had 33 counties, and this is important from a Mecklenburg standpoint. We had 33 counties that had a net loss of voter registration. I'll show you the map on the next slide. We had 46 counties that had a net gain between 1,000 and 10,000. Mecklenburg or Wake County added more voters in North Carolina than 79 counties combined together. We take those that had lost and those that added less than 10,000. There's 9 counties that added between 10 and 20,000. Wake or Mecklenburg added more voters than those 9 counties did. If you combine the 9 with the 46 that gained, Wake and Mecklenburg equaled those 88 counties. Then we had 10 counties that add between, I'll put on the chart between 20 and 50,000. Actually, it's between 20 and 43,000 on the net gain of registered voters. Wake or Mecklenburg equals those 10 counties. However, the top 12 counties in North Carolina equals 76% of all new voter registration growth in North Carolina over the last 10 years. So what you're seeing is into the suburban urban areas like Mecklenburg. Quite frankly, when you see the map, you're going to see Iredell County, you're going to see you see Mecklenburg County, you're going to see Union County, all of that into that concentration. So let me show you the map so you see what it looks like. This is the concentration of voters. Buncombe in the west, you got coastal areas there, you got Wake, Mecklenburg. Forsyth actually has upticked a little bit to the triad, but you got the Mecklenburg influence there with Cabarrus, Iredell, and Union. 2 interesting spots on the map, one Orange County and the other Cumberland County. Orange County actually had a net loss. Now, here's the thing, that net loss I think was less than 10 voters, but it's a negative number, so it's a negative number. I've been asked, well, what's that? I think it's 2 factors. First of all, 2008, you had Barack Obama running for president. In the 2008 presidential year, there was a massive drive at college campuses to register voters. And that took place. In fact, Barack Obama carried North Carolina in 2008, somebody nobody expected. We purged our voter rolls in North Carolina. College students leave. And I think in Orange County, the influence of heavy college registration in 2008, plus the fact that if you look at the growth around Durham and also Chatham County and Alamance County, Orange County has become a very expensive place to live. And so you got some of the outward migration that's taken place there as well. Cumberland County, I would write off to the military. Now, let's look at partisan trends. This is the breakdown of those clusters I talked to you about. And if you look at where this is by partisan areas, so in the 33 counties that lost registration, Democratic loss. I mean, 42% of the Democratic, you see that was Democratic loss. In the areas that had the less than 10,000, you see the loss there. The gains for the Democratic Party came in the big 12 counties where they had their gains, and in Wake and Mecklenburg, quite frankly, had very substantial gains there. Republicans gained in the areas that were growing the least. They had some good gains in the 20 to 50, but quite frankly, the majority of that gain came out of the coastal areas in 3 counties. That's sort of the partisan shift. The big number there is the gray box on the far right, and that's the unaffiliated. In the 12 counties, unaffiliated growth, remember that 900,000 number, that big chunk of that is in those 12 counties. So what I like to look at is impact on how people are voting. Because one thing is looking at voter registration trends. The other thing is how are these voters behaving? You're going to see 3 slides here. You're going to see presidential, you're going to see U.S. Senate, and you're going to see gubernatorial. And so what I did was I went back and pulled the 2012 presidential race between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, pulled the 16 race with Trump and Clinton, and then pulled the 2020 race with Trump and Biden. If you look at the far left, if you look at the top being the Republicans, Donald Trump did almost 5 points better in those 33 counties that lost voters, percent of the vote, by the way, than Mitt Romney did. Donald Trump did better in the counties that had less than 10,000. Sort of a leveling off effect in the 9 counties. And then when you get to the counties that are growing quicker, you see a drop off of the ballot vote for the Republicans. Democrat numbers the opposite. Lower areas, their trend lines down, but the areas that are growing, their trend lines up. As I say to I did this presentation to a group of financial advisors, and you get through the slides. Basically, Republican vote success right now has been built on a diminishing return. The U.S. Senate race. This is taking 2014 Thom Tillis, 16 Richard Burr, 2020 Thom Tillis, and then 2022 Ted Budd. You look in the rural areas on the left, I'll call them the rural areas, the lost registration areas, you see the trend line continues going up. Same thing on the net, the less than 10,000. You get over here into the big 12 counties, there's a little bit, just statistically, a little bit better performance, probably due more to voter turnout, voter participation than what the Republicans had. But overall, that trend continues in the U.S. Senate race. So one outlier, Richard Burr in the 2016 race. Richard Burr did much better than the other Republican performers in the bigger areas. That had everything to do with the fact that Deborah Ross was opposed to sex offender registry, and we targeted suburban-based women heavily in that race. It had nothing to do with the issue set or the brand identity of the Republican candidates. It was all about the Democratic candidate in that race. Gubernatorial, as I always tell everybody, there's an exception to everything. The 2020 gubernatorial race with Dan Forrest was an exception for Republicans in that he broke the trend in the areas that were growing less. He actually did not do as well or improve his standing there. That's probably a heavy influence from the unaffiliated, but even in the faster growing areas of the big 12 counties, you see that drop off was even more pronounced. I look at the gubernatorial race to tell you just how important the unaffiliated voters are going to play in determining the outcome. If you're going to win this state, doesn't matter if you're a Republican or Democrat, you have to win the unaffiliated vote. If you cannot win the unaffiliated vote, you simply cannot win this state. Also, and I'll probably jump ahead and get in Q&A of this, but 2028 I see is a tipping point. By 2028, North Carolina will be 40% unaffiliated. The 2 major parties will be 30% of the vote each. So right now, Republicans are the least largest voting group, followed by Democrats. Unaffiliated already dominate. So our politics is going to be competitive in the general election. It's going to look more like New Hampshire and Maine than it is in North Carolina of the past. Leading into, I did a survey. I've done a work with a group now for 10 plus years called Conservatives for Clean Energy Renewables. I've gotten to know people like Joel Olson through work like that. Done a lot because y'all have a heavy influence there within particularly the Cornelius area, as well as that industry. And in their survey back in May, I asked this question. They always let me put a political question on, and I'm always looking to spark my interest. So I asked this question this year. about which statement best describes your opinion of about the Republican or Democratic Party. And that was 1, the Democratic Party best represents my political views or values. 2, Republican Party does, or 3, I don't think either party. If you look at N equals 500, it was 27% Democratic, 31% Republican, 36% neither. This is still a right of center state, so that's not a surprise there. But if you look at the Republicans, it was 75.8% said their party. Democrats are only 58.1%, and I'll get into that in a second. Unaffiliated, though, 19% Democrat, 17.7% Republican, 58% neither party. They're up for grabs. Back in 2016, John Bradford, because he's one representative for a lot of y'all there, I do John Bradford's work. John had an independent running against him. About 6 weeks out before that race, John Bradford was 13 points down. And the independent candidate was winning unaffiliated voters overwhelmingly. And John said, what do we do? I said, it's very simple. I have to make that independent into a Democrat, because the independents that year, that is leaning that way. Once we did that, John ended up winning by 13 percentage points. But the fact of the matter is that the unaffiliated voters have no loyalty to a political party. They have no loyalty to a candidate, by the way. And they're completely up for grabs by both sides. And they like being in that position, by the way. The under 40 voters, 61.5% of those voters under 40 said that neither party represented themselves. Over 40 skewed Republican. Guess what? No surprise to a lot of people. Republican Party is a party of older white voters, by the way. Democratic Party tends to be a party of younger, more ethnically diverse voters. And that goes back to the number on the Democratic Party. The fight in the Democratic Party is between the liberal voter and the radical voter. There's a whole path, a slice of voters in the Democratic Party that does not think their party is liberal enough. I did not put a slide in here about tracked out ideological positioning of both political parties in this state for over 25 years. Republicans, no surprise, is ideologically right of center. What took place in 2008 with Barack Obama, he nationalized the Democratic Party in North Carolina. Before 2008, the Democratic Party was a right of center party. The Democratic Party is now a left of center party and continuing to move. So what you're seeing take place on the Democratic side is more of a nationalization of their party in North Carolina. For an old war horse like me, back in the 90s, so you know, the Democratic Party in North Carolina was held out as a national model for other parties because they were bucking the trend in a lot of states. And that was because of the influence of leaders like Jim Hunt, David Price, and others. They kept their party right of center to be competitive in right of center state. They're now having to struggle with that fight internally within their party. And that's not to say, though, that the Republican Party doesn't have their own fight as well. So we talked about unaffiliated a minute ago. This is fave unfave on it's a survey that was done. Glenn Bolger, Republic Opinion Strategies. If you Google Glenn, Glenn's one of the national top pollsters, and as I think only pollster by the Association of Political Consultants to be recognized as pollster of the year 3 times. Glenn and I share in the fact that Glenn's first congressional client as a pollster is a guy named Richard Burr. My first congressional client as a general consultant was a guy named Richard Burr. So Glenn and I have done a lot of work together over the years. And Glenn and I was working on a project back in May and June. This was N equals 600 voters, and it was with cell phones at 89%. And Jeff, we get into questions. If you want to talk about polling validity, we can cover that at that point in time. But here's Joe Biden's favorable, unfavorable. He's 36-56 with 8% no opinion, never heard of. Republicans universally do not like Joe Biden, 94% unfavorable. Democrats are at 72. You got the 16 a little bit there, but unaffiliated is 59 unfavorable. If you look at Donald Trump on the right, he's 36-51. Their image numbers are slightly the same. Trump with Republicans is not nearly as is at 78-20, has a problem there in the general election. Problem from that standpoint with that voting group. Unaffiliated is 24-69 unfavorable right now. So whereas Biden and Trump, when I talked about how both unaffiliated figured neither party represents them, look at the unfavorables of the leaders of both parties nationally. The unaffiliated are very unfavorable towards both of them. It scores both. A lot of conversations about the gubernatorial race. We actually put in there a slide and an image on Josh Stein, Mark Robinson. Stein at 18 to 24 fav, unfav, Mark Robinson 22 to 17. Quite frankly, the real number there is that half the voting electorate has no opinion or never heard of these two guys. Any polling you see on the gubernatorial race right now is irrelevant because neither candidate is defined with the voting electorate. Polls are not predictors. Polls are nothing but indicators of which way the wind's blowing. And the way the wind blows on the gubernatorial race is it's yet to be determined or decided because the candidates are yet to be defined. And then I think it's the last slide we got here in the deck, and then we'll go to Q&A. I asked this question in a state house race last cycle in Wake County. It was a district of Apex and Cary, which quite frankly, 10 years ago had heavy Republican representation. And I asked the question, we always have generic ballot tests. All things being equal, we prefer Republican or Democrat. That sort of tells us the mood of the electorate. If you look at this particular district, the generic ballot test was plus 15 Democratic. N equals 300 voters. Same group of voters, 3 questions later, were asked the question, all things being equal, you prefer a moderate Republican or a liberal Democrat. It went 42-44 for the Republican. The movement is with the unaffiliated voters. Now, the reason why I asked this question was I wanted to look to see if there's any erosion within the parties. Very little erosion with Republicans, a little bit more erosion with Democrats, but statistically not much of a difference. But the real movement was within the unaffiliated 30-point movements. What that shows and what that tells you is that whereas both sides are going to have their primaries and they may fight their primaries out on both right and the left, when it comes to the general election, the voters, if you're going to win these unaffiliated, they expect that fight to be into the middle. And that's where we're headed. I mean, that's just the trend lines here. So that's a little bit of my segue in. We'll get into Q&A. I'm going to close this out and get back to, we're back to the full slide now. You good, Jeff?
We are good.
All right. I want to make sure I didn't have my screen up. All right.
All right, we're going to jump into this conversation a little bit. And I'm going to start with something you mentioned, which, and we're primarily going to focus kind of thinking about for the audience at the national level. So it's presidential and statewide elections. So US Senate, governor, those things. We're not going to really talk or some statewide races, but not really the municipal. So you made the comment that in the governor's race right now in North Carolina, none of the candidates are defined. How does a candidate get defined, and when does that happen in an election cycle?
Well, right now, Josh Stein is looking to try to define Mark Robinson a little bit when it looks at his fundraising base, which is what's taking place. What I will tell folks is I describe myself, I'm known as a political consultant. I'm a marketing guy that does politics. And this is all about marketing. The people that cover American politics, the people that cover state politics, all the reporting, they think it's about issues. They think it's about substance. It's about marketing and how you market and how you connect with voters. So I'll use in Richard Burr 2016, I just made a reference, U.S. Senate race, chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. We got reporters being beheaded overseas. We got an international war taking place. And what voters cared about in North Carolina was the fact that Deborah Ross opposed the sex offender registry. And that's what we ran the whole race on, that one thing. So on the gubernatorial race, whereas everyone who wants to observe this process, they're going to want to talk about issues. They're going to talk about education budgets. They're going to talk about higher education and whatever else. The strategy for the two campaigns are going to be, one, normalize or moderate or make myself more of a moderate without alienating my base while I radicalize the other candidate. That's what it's going to come down to. If you look at the last gubernatorial race and you want to look at the volatility of North Carolina, look at the 2020 cycle. You had Donald Trump carrying the state by 50-some plus thousand votes. You had Thom Tillis carrying the state by 90-some plus thousand votes. You had Dan Forrest losing by a couple of hundred. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but lost dramatically. These are the same people voting. So they voted one way at 2 races, and they flipped and went the other way. And then they went down and elected Mark Robinson overwhelmingly. That is the ticket splitting that takes place. The reason why you had that movement off of the gubernatorial race was because of a mask. Dan Forrest's refusal to wear a mask was viewed as being foolish. And I've said this, and Jeff, you probably heard me say this before. When it comes, first of all, the voting public thinks all politicians are crooks anyway. So your opinion on Roy Cooper didn't matter if you thought he was a crook, but when it comes to an election, the voter is going to pick the crook over the fool anytime, because the crook's only going to steal so much because he doesn't want to get caught. The fool can lose everything. Dan Forrest was made into a fool. Josh Stein will try to do that to Mark Robinson. The question is on the gubernatorial race, if Mark Robinson is the nominee, and I say if he is the nominee, or if Josh Stein's the nominee, if Mark Robinson's the nominee, will he have the wherewithal to be able to do that to the other side?
So what issues, I mean, they still run on it. Are there particular issues you see having an influence on the outcomes of some of these elections?
If
Or
it was
will it be
me,
how
well,
you paint and position an opposing candidate?
well, here's what I look at from the I look at from a Republican standpoint, and I can take this on a race, for any statewide race, if you've got the dollars, and we can get into the cost of the dollars, because that's
Yep.
very important.
We're gonna
here.
go there.
It's very important here for someone to understand how that impacts everything. But quite frankly, you look at where the Republicans are right now, Republicans have won the battle on the social war. They have won that. They don't have to further define themselves, number one. Number two is they have won the economic battles. They don't have to further define themselves. You can look at what, Jeff, what you did in legislature and what your colleagues did in legislature, continue to do on tax policies. In fact, as I told Thom Tillis, I said, look, you started a process that created a tremendous opportunity for businesses to come into this state and locate. The employees they're bringing with them is changing the political dynamics of the field, and we need to change our political dynamics of our issue set, so we're going to become non-competitive. To me, that shift in the issue for Republicans needs to be with higher education. We need to get back to not looking like we're having a declaring a war on the university system. We need to be looking at building partnerships with the university system as it relates to a modern day workforce preparedness to be able to be competitive in a global economy. If you go sit down and talk to people like Jim and Ann Goodnight, they will tell you that we simply are not producing the products out of our university system to come work in our country. So we have to recruit internationally to be able to get talent to come work. What we need to do is close that international gap of recruitment and make it a North Carolina incubator for success. And if you do that, Republicans will be golden. But look, I'm just a consultant. I'm not a candidate.
So how do we go about recruiting outstanding candidates for either party then?
Well, that comes down to the structure of the hierarchy of folks of what they want to do. I mean, quite frankly, I think that has to come out of the business world. I don't think it comes out of political parties. And the reason why I say it doesn't come out of political parties, because the party activists on both sides tend to represent the ends of both of ideological spectrum. They don't represent the more moderate side of the ideological spectrum. So you've got to change that. That begins at the top of the ticket. It begins at the top of the ticket across the board. Democrats have been much better at doing that in North Carolina at the state level than Republicans have. And that's been because of people like Jim Hunt, Roy Cooper. You got a longer legacy of governors being able to do that. So from a North Carolina standpoint, get a Republican governor that has the ability to create that model, to create and elevate that, you'll get along further way down the road. But it's going to me, it comes out of the business community. And I'm a guy, Jeff, you know, I've had my business has been built on working for business people who want to get in politics. It's not politicians who want to go further up the ladder.
So what are the factors that, besides maybe not being a politician, but what are the factors that make a good candidate, and what are the factors that you have to address to win an election? What does it take to win an election?
Well, first of all, everybody needs to understand that the price point of running for office is determined by the media market in which you live in. And you have to that's why I get into the marketing side of this. So give you an example. If you're running for state house in New Hanover County in Wilmington area, the Wilmington, well, I'll even give you a better example. Let's talk about the congressional primary in the 11th district, actual media market. If I'm assuming most of the people here on this are familiar with former Congressman Madison Cawthorn in the 11th district, high profile national race. Okay, high profile national race. Whenever Chuck Edwards, my client, had decided to run, Cawthorn was not in the race. Cawthorn moves back to the district. I get a phone call from some folks saying, "Can you guys beat him?" And my response was, "Yes, we can, because we're in Asheville. If we were in Charlotte, Raleigh, or Greensboro, we could not." Had nothing to do with any issue. It had everything to do with the media market. And the reason for that is that in the Asheville media market, I could take $22,000 of Chuck Edwards' money, who was writing a $250,000 check. I could take $22,000 and go on broadcast TV and I could build about 40 to 50% awareness on $22,000. For me to come into the Charlotte market and do that, that price point was $300,000 a week. Big difference. So, you know, in Chuck's case, he needed $22,001 donors a week. I needed over 300 a week in Charlotte. The marketplace, the price points in Charlotte would make it cost prohibitive for me to be able to move that needle. Had nothing to do with a single issue whatsoever.
How much is money the driver in politics today?
Money has to be the driver in politics today. And that's not, and I say that not from a standpoint of any reflection of anyone in politics or anyone in reflection of doing what I do. I say that as if you look at the negative side of the money in politics, it's more of a negative reflection on the American voting public themselves, that they choose not to get informed when they got more information available for themselves than ever before. We have to go, when you look at voter participation in municipal elections, why is voter participation lower in municipal elections than it is in races for governor, for president, or whatever? That's because less money is spent in making voters and educating voters. Voters, when they get educated, will come out to vote. However, campaigns have to be doing that process. We have to go out there, and as I tell everybody, we have to politely invade your life with an issue or with something that you care about to get you to pay attention, so that then you will go vote when it comes to election day. There is a direct correlation between the dollars you spend and voter participation. We have more diversification of media today. Back when I got in this business, WBT out of Charlotte, they had a Washington D.C. correspondent, and that correspondent, you had a 30 minutes news. You didn't have 2-hour, 3-hour window of news. You had 30-minute news segment between 6 and 6:30, and you had 5 minutes dedicated to what was taking place in Washington with your state senator or your member of Congress. You no longer have that. So you have, whereas you've had diversification, and at the same time, a lot of folks don't care about it. I mean, it's not as much of an interest to them, so they don't pay attention to it. They may care about it, they don't pay attention to it. And you have to be able to get into front of them to get them to pay attention. That's just how it works. I mean, it's advertising across the board. It's no different whether you're selling Coke or Pepsi. You have to be out there, and you have to be in the marketplace, and you have to be in the marketplace of where they get their information. You can't expect them to come to you to get the information on their own.
Can you kind of differentiate or educate us a little bit of the difference between PACs, what they are, and is from a political perspective, and access to money? Talk a little bit about what IEs are, independent expenditure groups, and the term that is really comes across as a pejorative is dark money, and should it exist, and how is it used?
All right. First of all, you have the candidate funding, and let's talk about candidates. And at the federal level, I do more federal stuff. I think right now federal contribution limit is $33,000 per cycle, be it primary cycle, general election cycle. So the most
when you say the limit per individual,
individual, that's right. And then you got a party limit, you got some other rules. But let me talk about campaign contributions on candidate committees and the political parties. I mean the contribution limits and the advertising world and how that impacts, and because that plays very much in the role in the importance of dark money, if you want to call it dark money. And I'll hit on that in a second. But in the changes of the world in 1984, and I actually did this, got asked a question that a couple of weeks ago. Rufus Edmonston, who ran for governor in 1984, was in the audience. Okay. But in 1984, in North Carolina, you could take $100,000. Campaign contribution limit in North Carolina was $4,000 per individual in 1984. You could take $100,000 and buy every single broadcast media station in the state of North Carolina for 1 week at $100,000, and you could build 70% impressions with North Carolina voters on $100,000. In today's North Carolina, that price point is $960,000 to buy the same amount of media, and you get a reach of about 30%. So think about that from a business model standpoint. Now, the contribution limits at state level have increased over 6,000 or whatever, but let's put it back into $1,000 terms. I need $100,000 donors in 1984 to get 70% reach. I now need $961,000 donors to get half the reach. That's the marketplace of the campaigns. So where do you fill that void? That board comes in with independent expenditure groups. It comes in with dark money groups. Now, when it relates to independent expenditures, you got a question?
No, I was just saying, if you will explain what an IE is, people
Well,
probably.
an IE is independent expenditure. It is an entity that's set up either through a IRS C4 domination classification or a 527 IRS political action committee that can take unlimited corporate money or unlimited individual money. Quite frankly, if you went that route with campaign committees, you could solve a lot of the disclosure issues that come around that. First of all, so an independent expenditure group is a corporate entity that engages in a political activity. I will make the argument, and that came out of 2010 U.S. Supreme Court race on United. The national media hated Citizens United because they said that was going to be the end of American politics. No, the Citizens United case was the beginning of the end of what I say the first corporate sanctioned independent expenditure groups in American politics, and that's the news media. If you look at the history of this country and you look at the First Amendment right to free speech, we have a whole long history of news organizations that were created under the First Amendment to carry out with a political agenda. That's not a slam on the news media. As I'll tell everybody, go look at the Maryland Republican. Go to the Library of Congress, pull the Maryland Republican. It was a newspaper. It was created during the Civil War to support the policies of Abraham Lincoln. After Lincoln's assassination in the Civil War, guess what? It went away. But it's there. It's part of history. It's written. Or read John Meacham's book, The Soul of America, and he'll go into a little bit further detail on that. So we have corporate entities. And so they can come in and they can then engage into that process. So like in Thom Tillis' last U.S. Senate race in 2020, that race was spending in North Carolina, known spending in North Carolina, that's reported through the independent expenditure groups and the candidates, eclipsed $330 million. Less than 100 million of that was from the candidates. The other part of that was from the independent expenditure groups. Campaigns cannot coordinate with those groups. So both sides have these pseudo operations that parallel the campaigns and come in. That can be a good thing, that can be a bad thing, because quite frankly, the candidates don't control that. And an independent expenditure group can do an ad that hurts your candidacy because a lot of voters don't distinguish between the two. Pat McCrory is another good example in the U.S. Senate race. All the negatives on Pat McCrory were done by an independent expenditure group. It was a group that had funds spent over $15 million deciding they did not want that guy to get the nomination, and they ran a 100% negative campaign against him. Pat McCrory did not have the juice on the other side to get people to come, the cavalry to come in and try to rescue that or be able to raise that money himself. That's the playing field of American politics today.
So what do you see that trend projects elections, particularly statewide? And when you say North Carolina becomes the tipping point and the determining state, which will set policy and direction for the entire United States for decades, what kind of money is going to get spent in the next Senate race?
Well, I think right now the Senate race at a minimum 600 to 800 million in 2026. Now I want to say that here's what I'm going to tell you. I told Thom Tillis going into the 2020 race, I saw it being a $200 million Senate race. He thought it was going to be 250. It clipped out at 330. So that was a record that was set. And if you look at the history, Tillis set the first record about 115, 110 in 2014. It was broken in 2016.
And that's total money spent by both candidates, right?
That's by both candidates, both sides, i.e. everybody, not just the candidates. As I tell everybody, unfortunately, I'm on the candidate spending side of the equation. We're the smallest part of that pie when it comes to what's being spent there. Actually, that number was broken in January or December in the U.S. Senate race, January in Georgia, with over $500 million being spent. That was the stakes. So to keep in mind, in North Carolina, if Republicans don't have a majority in the U.S. Senate after the 2024 presidential cycle, then they're going to win a majority. They have to win and keep Thom Tillis in North Carolina. So it's going to be we're going to spend whatever it takes for it to happen. That will be the attitude. On the right, on the left, they're going to spend whatever it takes to keep it from happening. That becomes a marketplace. The people that benefit most by that is your TV stations, because one of the things is that candidate spending. I'll just give you an example. One thing that drives that nut, and it's worth mentioning, is that whereas I can go into WBT, WSOC, whatever, and buy an ad and pay $550 for that 30-second spot, an independent expenditure group coming in, buying a 30-second ad in the same news break or in the same primetime spot, they will pay 2, 3, sometimes 4 times more because they have issue rates and the station sets a higher rate. So they pay 2 to 3 times more. Their spending is actually for reach. They're spending a whole lot more for a whole lot less reach. That's the market side that nobody talks about in American politics. That's the market side that reporters don't understand. As I tell reporters, look, you know, the reason why we're spending this money is because your station keep raising your rates, lower your rates. But it's a business model. And so, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's a business model.
Sure. So we'll jump a little bit. Give us your assessment of both the upcoming state Senate race. You talked about Tom. Who do you see? Who are the candidates that are viable that on the other side of the aisle? And also do the same for the governor's races, both parties coming up.
Are you talking about U.S. Senate race in 2026 or you want?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about that first. Paul Shumaker is everybody knows that we're
Paul,
already
you're breaking up a little
we're
bit.
working on that today. All right. You better because I have
There you
good
go.
internet. All right. First thing I'm saying is that Thom Tillis is running for re-election in 2026. I'm not making the announcement for him. We're already working on that. He has made that pretty clear, I think, to everybody from that standpoint. On the Democratic side, it depends on what happens on the legislative redistricting and congressional maps. So I could put Jeff Jackson on that list if he is taken out of a congressional district. I'd also put him on the list for attorney general candidate if that takes place on the Democratic side this cycle coming on. I take Wiley Nichols. When you look at Jeff Jackson and Wiley Nichols on the congressional side, their districts are the ones that are most likely to change, that could become more competitive for Republicans. Wiley Nichols was in a Republican-leaning district, got elected Republican-leaning district. He's proven he can win in that kind of a race. That makes him a battle-tested person from that standpoint. If he's not successful in the 24 cycle, then I could easily see them rolling into a U.S. Senate race. A big question mark would be what's Roy Cooper going to do? Is Roy Cooper going to want to sidestep state level, look at federal level? Is he going to go work if Biden's successful winning re-election, go work in the Biden administration, follow Mandy Cohen? But those are the 3 top folks that I see right now from that standpoint. Democrats, I think, after the last cycle of 2022, no slam on Beasley. Don't take anything I say as I tell everybody. I mean, like I do this for a living. And so I do what I've never done a negative ad in my career. I've always done issue ads, but sometimes the people who are the subject of those issue ads, they take exception to it and take it personal. It's not personal. Shree Berry's a nice person. She's a good chief. I mean, you know, when she did role as chief justice, everything else, she's a credible candidate. But however, she was not the type of candidate it takes to attract the kind of money you have to get into the game. She never brought the money into the game in the Beasley, I'm sorry. She never brought the money into the game in the 2022 cycle. In Thom Tillis's race in 2024, we had a very simple, easy strategy statement. Raise enough money to keep the outside money in the game. That's what we had to do because we were running against an incumbent, a well-funded incumbent. We were outspent almost 3 to 1, outraised 3 to 1 by our opponent. And we were not going to be able to be successful without having the outside money in the game. So the Democrats are going to be looking for a candidate that can attract the outside money. They have to do that if they're going to make North Carolina competitive. And that is driven by the price of this marketplace. We are a very, very, very expensive state. Back in the 90s, we did not, because of the growth in the charts we talked about earlier, we did not have an A media market in North Carolina. Charlotte became the first A media market in the 90s. Today, we have 3 A media markets nationally. That is Charlotte, Raleigh, and Greensboro, Winston-Salem. And that A media market means that, and in the Charlotte market, which is the most expensive market in the state, the reason why Charlotte's so expensive is because of South Carolina voters and people residents of South Carolina. They get the Charlotte media. So you're paying for a slice of people who, you know, advertising to them who cannot come vote for it.
So how are they going to appeal in the future to the unaffiliated voters? Since you said they're not loyal to candidates, they vary on issues. I think they tend to be one issue oriented. Can you educate us on that a little bit?
Okay, well, first of all, unaffiliated voters are not one issue oriented. Unaffiliated voters overall are have higher degree of higher levels of education. than both parties. They have higher levels of
They're
income.
smarter than the rest of us.
Well, they have higher levels of income. They're more likely to have come here from someplace else or whatever else. They're more mobile. Always I go back and look, it's not slim, but I always chuckled in Thom Tillis's first race in for state house. Our opponent was hitting on Thom Tillis because he wasn't born and raised in North Carolina. He was, he had somebody who moved here from another state. When we did our survey, a majority of the primary voters in that district had moved here from another state. Okay. When you look at unaffiliated, the overwhelming majority of them have come here. So the theme of North Carolina values and all that does not cut and resonate with them. What unaffiliated voters care about are the issues. They care about the issue set and what's on their table. So a good example in the last race in 2020 cycle with Tillis is the COVID issue. Unaffiliated voters, some saw COVID as a healthcare issue, others saw COVID as an economic issue. We have a thing in politics today called probability modeling and data analytics. So we built out our data programs. And so in the Tillis race, we took the unaffiliated and saw COVID as a healthcare, and we messaged them on everything that was being done on vaccines, about wearing a mask, all the things that need to be on the healthcare side of that. On the economic side, we talked about the economic relief programs that were being taken place and talking to them that way. The one thing you got to understand about unaffiliated voters, I tell everybody, is a little bit different between a suburban urban living in Mecklenburg County than unaffiliated voters, say, living in Rutherford County to your west. Unaffiliated voters, the more rural the area, the more behavioral Republican or conservative they tend to be. The more suburban urban the area, the more moderate to the left they tend to be. But overwhelmingly unaffiliated voters are economic conservatives. They tend to be social moderates to social liberals. I try to label them as tolerant conservatives to a degree, is how they view themselves. And quite frankly, it dates me, but they go back to, they're more reflective of a Jim Martin, Jim Holzhauser, Jim Hunt type of a voter. That they don't see them too far to the right, too far to the left, but you got to take into account their hierarchy of need. The fact they have higher income, when we look at the economy, what impact is the economy going to have? And this is why I say with Republicans, we have won this economic war. And I'll give you an actual case with the focus group voter that we saw with this particular universe. But their decisions when the economy gets tight, their economic decisions are not driven by how they're going to pay their bills, what their grocery impact is or whatever else. Their economic decisions are more impacted about, does my child go to a private school, private 4-year university, or they go to a public 4-year university? Do we take a vacation to Europe, or do we go somewhere in the United States? They're not taking the necessities of life off the table and feel those being threatened. It's their discretionary income that's more threatened in a tight economy than it is the necessities of life. Also, if it gets too bad, it gets too tough, and they don't like the price points, they'll just pick move and go somewhere else, because they usually work for companies that are highly mobile, and they came here from somewhere else. But we had a lady that in one of our focus groups in the 2020 cycle, and we were talking about the impact that Biden's going to have on the economy and everything else. And she was very simple. She said, look, we started our business when Barack Obama was president of the United States. I voted for Donald Trump in 2016. I'm not voting for him in 2020 because of the way he behaves. She goes, I'm not worried about Joe Biden's economic policy. She said, we will survive that. We built our businesses. Our businesses survived Democratic presidents. They survived Republican presidents. So all of this about the skies falling is just not true. That's how they see the world. Sure. They see themselves as being able to manage and navigate whatever it is that both sides throw at them.
So is a group like No Labels that's looking at putting together moderates like Joe Manchin and the former governor or senator from Utah, Holtzman. Is that a viable long-term group, or will they gain momentum, or is that just people wasting their time?
Well, I'm not going to say it's a waste of time, because a couple of things. That first of all, what it does is sort of underscores some of the dissatisfaction that's out there. But guess what? Dissatisfaction in the process is not new to the process. The reality is that it's impossible to elect an independent candidate to the White House for the simple reason of the Electoral College and the way our election laws are structured and set and done all of that. The fact that they highlight the discussion for the candidates and they're recognizing the problem, that's a good thing. I've always been an advocate that more political debate, more political discussion, more people engaged in the marketplace makes the marketplace better. As I have said, and Jeff, you may be in the room 1 or 2 times, but I'm a free market conservative. I run my own business. As I say, I'm a marketing guy that does politics. I'm a free market conservative. I don't know why both political parties don't want to apply those principles to the marketplace, to the voters, because quite frankly, the voters are the ones going to determine their outcome. You need to be gearing yourself to what your marketplace is. Don't expect your marketplace to change their behavior to conform to you. If they were willing to do that, they would already be joining your group. The fact is, you see that I mean, the way I'd like to put this is, let's look at North Carolina, and I've got 3 products here for you. I got one product that has spent $100 million on advertising, and they've lost 10% of market share. I got another product that spent $100 million on advertising, and they've lost 3% of the market share. And I got another product over here that has spent $0 on advertising. They have no sales force, and they've increased their market share 50%. Who are you going to invest in? Who do you want to listen to? I mean, it's to me, it's just basic common sense.
Couple procedural things about elections. One is there's so much focus and attention on gerrymandering. Is gerrymandering a problem? Do we see it changing how we draw districts going forward?
Gerrymandering is only a problem for the party that's not in power. Okay, and I'm serious. And look, and I find a great humor. I find it very humorous for me to listen to some of the Democratic arguments, because I grew up at a time when we had state legislative districts that had 4 members representing 1 district. Now, the reason why we had 4 members representing 1 district is that Democratic map drawers knew that if they broke those up into 4 individual districts, 2 Republicans will win and 2 Democrats will win. But if we lumped them all together, we could keep 4. Okay. Also, if you looked at the congressional, I think you had a congressional district that started in Mecklenburg and ran all the way over to Raleigh, that was drawn by the Democratic map makers, map drawers, to keep a Democratic district. You know, it's only an issue. The fact of the matter is, U.S. Constitution sets up this process. We have an election. Voters have an opportunity to participate. Voters have an opportunity to engage in that process when it comes to the ballot box. And the fact is, we have a review system set forth by the courts. In the redistricting process, a little bit of a history lesson here. The reason why we do not have 4-member legislative districts in North Carolina any longer is because Republicans sued in federal court to bust that up. The reason why we no longer have judges in North Carolina elected state, every judge in North Carolina used to be elected statewide. So a district court judge in Mecklenburg County was on a statewide ballot. The reason why that was done to keep Democrats in charge in the courthouse. The reason why that's busted up, Republicans took them to federal court. Same thing with your districts. And so this is a whole new process. So yes, gerrymandering is going to be a political process. And yes, you've got an independent court system that can help level out that process.
So then on voter integrity, voter ID, in essence, you know, it's been around, it's coming back, it goes up and down. 39 states have some form of voter ID. You do data analytics. What's the data analytics told us about that issue?
The majority of voters favor voter ID in North Carolina. In fact, the majority of voters voted on voter ID when they had that. I think the more telling argument, I mean, I love voter ID.
It's not just Republicans though, right?
Well, but no, we had a constitutional amendment on voter ID, but I love voter ID. I mean, overall majority of voters favor voter ID, and for simple reason, we use our ID for so many things. If we really view electing individuals to office as an important function, why don't we elevate it to the same level of a plane ticket? You got to have an ID to get on a plane. Very simple. You got to have people have IDs. The fact is that the reason why I love voter ID so much as a political issue is that those that are opposed to it, as they argue why they don't want it, it creates great political fodder for guys like me and Andy Hakes is on this to go out there and use it in our campaign. It is very simple. It's viewed as a matter of practical common sense. That's how voter ID is viewed. And so as long as the left wants to argue against it, let them argue against it. I'll take that fight every day of the week.
So as a marketing person, how much is technology, and we've got only a couple more minutes, how much is technology playing into this in terms of being able to actually do true data analytics, to use, are the candidates really doing that to help guide decisions? Are you able to micro target? is that kind of stuff going on in campaigns?
I was the first guy in the United States in a U.S. Senate race to use micro-targeting profile and data targeting. That was in 2004, race with Richard Burr. Thom Tillis in 2014, we were one of the first ones to have probability modeling brought into the marketplace. There's some others that were done that. I'm heavy into the data analytics. Technology has changed the way American politics totally executes. And it's because it's made the price point available for us. So you need to understand, and I've said this to many, many reporters, is that there's two, when you're looking at a race for governor, you're looking at a race for United States Senate, or any major race, be it nationally on a presidential race. There's two campaigns taking place here. There's the macro campaign, there's the micro campaign. The macro campaign is what everybody sees on television. It's what all the reporters are going to want to write about. A real campaign, though, below that will have a level of what I call the micro. And to put that into example for you into Thom Tillis's world, and Thom Tillis is a data guy. He gets it. He's very heavy into it. In Thom Tillis's campaign, we probably did 8 to 10 television ads. We may have done 12. I couldn't tell you. But I did 135 different digital ads, 15, 30-second TV ads that were put on people's put on their laptops, put on their telephones, never went on the air. If you were not in my data universe, you didn't see it. I just told you about Mike. I just told you about the unaffiliated. We had them segmented into 2 universes. We had them segmented into COVID universe, healthcare, COVID universe, economic. When the Cal Cunningham scandal broke in the Thom Tillis race, broke on a Friday night. On Saturday morning, I'm calling my data team and I said, pull for me. We have a moral cluster universe. These were people that were viewed as social conservatives. I said, pull for me everybody in the moral cluster universe who was either who was undecided or voting for Cal Cunningham, who has not voted, because our universes are updated every day off of early voting. If you're a Tillis voter, I didn't care. But if you're voting for Cunningham or you're undecided, you hadn't voted, pull for them for me. Now, get that data to my digital team, get it to my phone team, and get it to my mail guys, 3 different groups. I had automated calls going out Saturday afternoon on that schedule, on that issue. I had text messages going to those voters with a link to the news articles about that issue. I had mail being dropped on Monday about that issue. That's the micro campaign. I had digital TV ad ready to go on Monday to that issue. That's how it's been segmented. All of that adds to another layer of cost. So if you look at the layering of a campaign today on media and marketing, you got a base layer of broadcast TV. The real question is going to be, what role does cable TV play today? Because cable is quickly being replaced by digital advertising. I'm using the pipeline of Spectrum News to deliver ads to their voters because I don't need to talk to a mass audience anymore. I layer a blanket out there so everybody knows that, hey, here's the campaign, here's what we're focused on. I have a whole, literally geared towards on a micro world of mini clusters. I have universes that are small as 30,000 voters statewide. The data analytics is the same program I use working with the NCGOP over the last 2 cycles on how we approach our judicial races. Totally different, all driven by data, all driven by micro universes, and all driven by how we're going to campaign out, not a macro universe at all when it comes to the down ballot race. So it makes it more exciting to be in American politics today than ever before, all because of technology.
Well, we're at an hour. We could go on all morning. Paul, it is amazing insight that you provide to us as interested folks in the political system. It is a blessing again to have you on our side of the aisle, and appreciate the knowledge base and the experience that you share with all of us. And hopefully we will get you back at another time.
Glad to do it anytime. Appreciate it, and appreciate everybody taking the time to be here this morning. And Bill,
Yes,
thank you as always.
Bill, I'm going to throw it back to you. And this one is one we got to make sure we make people aware of out on social media when we load this on the chamber website, and then eventually put it out on social media. It's very helpful information.
Absolutely. Jeff, who's on deck for next month?
That's a good question, since I just got back from Williamsburg. If you other things, and no, I won't grab my folder.
That's all right. We'll get it out there. Also want to remind folks, WSIC 105.9 is a partner of ours, and Jeff and I are going to be doing a special show next Thursday, the 27th, 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. We're going to be recapping a lot of what we're seeing out there with filing. Filing deadline ends today at noon. So we will know who are lining up to run our communities in Iredell County and Mecklenburg County. So filing deadline ends today. We're going to review that on Thursday, the 27th on Good Morning LKN on WSIC. And we'll push that out too. Jeff, you probably just got the information.
Yep, I do. So next month, we actually have Speaker Tim Moore. The following month, we have Attorney General Josh Stein. The following month, in October, we have Congressman Dan Bishop. And then in November, we have U.S. Senator Ted Budd.
It's a good lineup.
Wow.
Want to thank Mike Riley again. I see that he's still on. Thank you, Mike, for being the presenting sponsor, Novant Health, Huntersville Medical Center of our Focus Friday series. Also, our leadership in Lake Norman and our junior leadership in Lake Norman, both of those programs were accepting applications for the adult leadership. And if you have a child that's a rising junior in high school, we have a matching program called Junior Leadership Lake Norman. Both of those are on our website at lakenormanchamber.org. Want to thank everybody for joining us today and have a great weekend at the lake. And thank you, Paul.